cast your minds back to 2004. Okay, I know mind-based time travel is a lot to ask of someone in the first 5 seconds of a video, but stick with me. It had been 2 years since the release of Wind Waker, a game that was both praised and highly divisive among fans for its frankly beautiful art style. Seriously, Zelda fans, the early 2000s, what was wrong with you? It still looks amazing 20 plus years later. Anyway, E3 2004 rolls around and one of Nintendo's most famous E3 presentations happens. Reggie Fils-Aimé breaks into Nintendo history with his famous first lines.
My name is Reggie, I'm about kicking ass, I'm about taking names, and we're about making games.
And the show ends with this. There it is, one of the biggest hype moments in gaming history. Fans had gotten exactly what they wanted, a dark, gritty, and mature Legend of Zelda game. As you can see, the crowd lost their collective minds. Shigeru Miyamoto came out on stage with a Master Sword and Hyrulean Shield, and, well, meme templates were born. Joy was felt across the world, nations united in pure excitement of a new, gritty Zelda. Sony and Microsoft bowed down in defeat.
We're not worthy! We're not worthy! We're not worthy!
Okay, a few of those things probably didn't happen. But it did get pretty crazy as Nintendo announced The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, a game that ended up releasing on 4 different systems over the course of 11 years, and is potentially going to release again for the Switch someday. Presumably. Maybe. Either way, it's time to enter into a dark and moody world in The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Pixel Tavern. Before we jump into things, since we are getting closer to the more modern Zelda games, I will say now that any future videos and pretty much every video up until this point will contain spoilers for both the story and the gameplay. You've been warned. We now move on to another generation of consoles. Well, 4 consoles actually, because Twilight Princess released for the GameCube, the Wii, the Wii U, and even in some territories, the Nvidia Shield, marking the first time a Nintendo-published Zelda game appeared on a non-Nintendo console. If you watched my last video, you might be wondering, why am I not covering Phantom Hourglass this time? Well, it turns out having a full-time job, plus all the other duties of life, and playing 2 long Zelda games every month, kinda means you can't get these videos out very often. So from now on, I'm going to cover 1 game at a time, and hopefully get these videos out at least a little quicker than I am at the moment. Anyway, do you remember those bright, colourful, amazing graphics of Wind Waker? Did you like them? Oh, that's great, so did I. Problem is America and the rest of Europe really didn't like them, so much so that for the next game in the series, Nintendo had to completely change its course and make a dark, moody 2006 colour scheme for its next game in the series. Get ready for Zelda's emo phase with Twilight Princess. This was the first game in the series that I was around for the hype phase of. That initial 2004 reveal trailer was a bit before I got into the franchise around 2005, but I could see the appeal and I was still excited for it, despite being in that stage between owning Wind Waker and actually getting into it. When I did play and complete it though, and started my love for the franchise alongside it, Twilight Princess quickly became the first game I can remember following everything about in the build-up to its release. Every trailer, article and gameplay demo I watched thoroughly, and my excitement for its release just continued to build. The 2006 E3 demo though gave me a first-class ticket to the hype train, showing off the features of Nintendo's next big console with the Wii's motion controls in full effect. At that point, Twilight Princess became the thing I was more excited for than anything else in the world. First releasing on 19th of November 2006 in the USA alongside the Wii, but with me living in the UK I had to hold out for another 2 to 3 weeks for it to arrive. But the wait was worth every second. I remember the day vividly. It was the second games console I'd bought with my own money on release day after the Nintendo DS a year prior. I kicked things off with about 20 minutes of Wii Sports to see how amazing the motion controls were, which I remember thinking were incredible at the time. Then I switched over to Twilight Princess. I played for about an hour, but then I had to go to a stupid party about an hour away. I stayed the night, but the next day I got the first train home just so I could play Zelda for the rest of the weekend. It was amazing. Playing with a controller unlike anything before it, I felt like gaming had taken a huge leap forward in its immersion. I must have played it for at least 8 hours that day, getting into a few dungeons and just absolutely falling in love with it. 2 weeks later I finished it, but weirdly I didn't return for quite a long time. Jumping forward to December 2023, where I used the Wii U HD version to play through it for this video, I had some worries. You see, despite how much I loved Twilight Princess when I first played it on the Wii, I found every subsequent playthrough just wasn't fun for me. I found the graphics to be dull and lifeless, I found it long and boring, and ultimately the few times I returned to this gritty Hyrule, it just never gave me that same excitement. When the Wii U version released on 14th of March 2016, I just didn't enjoy it as much as I hoped, and I didn't play it again until it was time to make this video. I went in with fears of boredom and disinterest again, but after 3 or so hours, those fears were completely gone, and all that enjoyment I first felt came rushing back. But you're probably wondering, why specifically 3 hours? Well, that's because the opening of this game kind of sucks. To show why, I have to talk about how the prior 3D titles kick things off. In Ocarina of Time, you are given a small explorable area to get used to the controls, get some basics down, and generally just have a playground style area to get to grips with things. If you want, you can skip pretty much all of that, grab the sword and shield, and be in the first dungeon within 5 or so minutes. In Majora's Mask, Link is turned into a Deku within a few minutes, setting a tone for the story. And within a few more minutes, you're in an open, explorable town with hardly any idea of what you're doing or where to go, all building up to a dark and foreboding setup to the story. Wind Waker, you have a similar style as Ocarina of Time again, of having a playground style area to get used to the controls, explore, and within minutes you're going to have a sword and are fighting a few enemies, before setting off to your first dungeon. Now then, let's compare that to Twilight Princess. First, you have a few minutes of cutscenes before you have to go and get Epona back from... Ilia? I'm sorry, I don't recognize that spelling of the name. Whoever it is has taken her into the forest. Okay, diving straight into adventure are we, Nintendo? Oh no, it's another cutscene. Okay, it's a bit more story-based and cinematic, that's fine. Then you have to play Epona's song, something you're not going to do again for a good several hours. Why is that the first thing the game is teaching me? Okay, now I get to ride Epona, so maybe this is going to lead into an escape or a chase scene or... No, it's going to give me a minigame of wrangling goats. Woo? Okay, not the best start, but we're done now, and we leap over the fence, and it's the next day. Okay, well I bet we find a dungeon this day, right? Right? What, are you kidding? Of course you're not going to find one. There are screaming children outside instead. Okay, let's go outside to see what they want. They want a slingshot, run around the town and find rupees to buy it. But with no sword, you will have to pick up and throw pumpkins to find said money. Once you have it, you practice with the slingshot, then you fish, then you chase a cat, then you carry a wicker baby basket as slow as possible, deal with the bratty children again, call a hawk to stop a monkey. Yeah, that really does happen. And after 30 minutes, you finally get a sword. Only to discover that it's made of wood. Then Nintendo's mid-2000s over-tutorialization rears its ugly head to teach you as slowly as possible how to use the sword. Okay, let's skip ahead 20 minutes. Oh, you're perhaps expecting a dungeon? Well, here is herding goats again! Oh my god, this opening is so painful. The first hour isn't even really tutorials. It's more just boring little mini-games and fetch quests that you only do once or twice for the rest of the 40-hour or so adventure. When something interesting does finally happen at the hour mark, you would be forgiven for expecting to get to run around with a real sword and maybe get into a dungeon. No, now you have to run around as Wolf Link and see more story first. I hate this opening. After the first hour, the story at least gets a little interesting with getting pulled into the Twilight Realm. Meeting Zelda and running around as a wolf is a little bit interesting. But the game's first 2 hours is so heavily focused on story and setting that the gameplay felt like an afterthought. There was no need at all to make this opening so locked in, so inescapable or skippable. Frankly, it's the worst opening in the series I can think of. Although I don't remember Skyward Sword's opening all too well, so I'll hold off on final judgment until the next video. Thankfully, Nintendo moved on from this style of opening, as did the rest of the industry, because there is little to no enjoyment for anyone here. Thankfully though, after this long, tedious opening, everything just goes from strength to strength. Let's kick off the more positive side of this game with its story and world, which is one of the best in the franchise. Link is already established in this world as an adult. He has a life, friends, and weirdly no family again, but definitely has a bit more of a character to his life than previous games. After 1 hour of just, oh my god, pure boredom, he gets pulled into the Twilight Realm, transformed into a wolf, and is saved by a new character, Midna, an imp-like creature from the Twilight Realm. The story is going for a lot more character building here, and lets off an anime style of storytelling. As Link travels Hyrule, removing the Twilight, saving his friends, and seeing the world in a somewhat shonen anime style, we get a very rich feeling world. Okay, sure, from a technical perspective, it's still fairly empty in places, but there is a lot of core areas such as Hyrule Town, Kakariko Village, Zora's Domain, and more that show a lot of character and detail to this world. As the story moves forward, we learn of the evil Twilight creature Zant, one of the weirdest and most memorable villains in the franchise. We also see how much this world can expand. Areas that felt quite small before suddenly expand into exciting new areas, such as a huge open Gerudo desert just off to the side of Lake Hylia, a blizzard-covered mountain just through a cave next to Zora's Domain, a Wild West town full of cats, and one of the coolest areas in the series, a return to the Lost Woods and the Temple of Time, now ironically ruined by the passing of time. These little surprises pop up throughout the adventure multiple times, and make its world feel so perfectly crafted for the story and gameplay. It's obviously not on as grand of a scale as Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom's map, but for the time, it felt absolutely massive in its scope, and still has a good scale today, and fits perfectly with the gameplay. Which was actually the main thing I was concerned about returning to this game for, especially after how smooth Wind Waker HD played. I was concerned it was going to feel clunky and slow compared to what I'd become accustomed to. But surprisingly, despite some early clunkiness, I quickly adapted to the feel of things. I don't remember if the original version played this smoothly, but the HD version holds up very well in terms of its controls. It is missing some of Wind Waker HD's cool extra features, such as being able to move around in first person, which I have no idea as to why was not included, but it does have motion controlled aiming and a full 3D camera, which is something that was missing from the Wii version. So overall, it controls very well and makes the gameplay all the better because of it, which is pure traditional Zelda style. It is basically what you would expect Ocarina of Time to play like had it been made for the GameCube. Intricate dungeons with multiple and varied mechanics across them, focusing heavily on environment-based puzzles, semi-open world exploration across multiple environments and large-scale areas, and a fun and engaging combat system that frankly is yet to be beat in the Zelda franchise. To me, the combat is a slowed-down version of Wind Waker's system, except rather than pressing A to parry enemies' attacks and automatically countering, you instead have to manually respond to enemy attacks and defense in order to fight. For example, in Wind Waker, Link would roll around an enemy and strike with the press of a single button when prompted, whereas in Twilight Princess, you learn new attacks as you progress, and that same action now requires multiple inputs from the player and can be done at any time. You can shield bash enemies and leap over them to strike their heads, roll around them to hit them in the back, sacrifice defense for a lethal strike, and the most fun of all, a finishing move that can be used on downed enemies that is incredibly satisfying to use. It should have stayed part of the franchise going forward, but sadly doesn't appear after Skyward Sword. This combat is really fun, and as I said, is my favourite in the franchise. Unfortunately though, it isn't really that challenging on a standard playthrough, but thankfully Twilight Princess HD brought with it a bit of an extra challenge. Hero mode returns, where no hearts appear and you take double the damage, but you can also bring in some extra difficulty here by using the Ganondorf amiibo, where you take double damage again on top of the hero mode's extra damage. So for a good 50% of your playtime, you will lose most, if not all of your health from even one basic hit. It is punishing, and I absolutely loved it. I always found the original game to be way too easy, but adding this difficulty really made every fight feel like a battle. Boss fights became much more challenging, and the Dark Nut enemies are truly a daunting task, especially when there is more than one of them. A recurring mini-boss, King Bulbin, would take half of Link's health in one attack, and by the final encounter, I had almost every heart piece in the game and still took an insane amount of damage. Complementing that combat is some amazing dungeons, while also having a large amount of them as well. If you found Wind Waker's 5 dungeons to be a bit lacking, well, you're in luck, because Twilight Princess has 9 full-scale dungeons, and each of them is a unique and ultimately fun experience, ranging from forests, volcanoes, and underwater temples, to temples in the sky, other dimensions, and even back in time. This game has fantastic variation in its design. The puzzle and general dungeon design across all 9 of them is, in my opinion, some of the best in the franchise even today, aided by some of the best items that are used in some of the most unique ways. There's metal boots that magnetize to walls and roofs, the Dominion Rod for controlling ancient statues that can crash through metal gates, and of course the amazing spinner which gets used so perfectly, if sadly not quite enough. Of course, I also have to mention the claw shot as well. Now, several Zelda games have used this kind of item before, but Twilight Princess doubles the fun by giving you 2 of them, which allows for some of the most fun traversal puzzles in the series. All of the items get used quite frequently, but because this is one of the biggest Zelda games and there are so many items here, it never feels quite enough for each one and leaves you wanting more. Other items include the standard bombs and bow and arrow, which feels particularly satisfying in this game thanks to some great sound design, and that you can even combine them. There's a boomerang with the power to create gales, and even a huge ball and chain that can crash through boulders. Everything is very satisfying to use here, and hasn't been topped in the franchise since. I could talk about all of the items and dungeons in detail, but the video would be way too long if I did. I will talk about one of them in particular though. The Temple of Time is not necessarily the best dungeon in Twilight Princess, although it's definitely up there, but to me it's undoubtedly the most interesting. Partway through the story you get the Master Sword from the decayed ruins of the Temple of Time, but when you later return there, you travel back in time to see that it has a full dungeon hidden within it. The puzzles here are fun, challenging, and unique, but for me, it's the lore of the dungeon that really sells it. Seeing the iconic structure from Ocarina of Time turned into something much grander was so amazing to see. There's also the tantalizing notion of not knowing what time period Link has returned to. Is this before, during, or after Ocarina of Time? Sadly, you never find out, but that curiosity alone is intriguing enough to make it such a memorable experience. There is also the Sky Dungeon, which feels like it has so many connections to the next game in the series, Skyward Sword. I don't imagine it's something the developers really had in mind, but it's still exciting to connect the lore together in your own way. One more thing that needs to be mentioned about the dungeons is some of the most cinematic boss fights in the entire series. From the second one onwards, they are all large-scale, exciting fights. There's a Goron on fire, an underwater giant worm that you have to claw shot and stab into the ground, a giant skeleton that you have to Beyblade your way up to defeat, a huge ancient spider, a giant dragon that you have to ride and fight into the ground, and there's the fast-paced battle against the new creepy villain Zant. All of these are really exciting battles. They are a bit on the easy side, but with the quadruple damage option in the HD version, and the option to switch to a weaker sword, they all give a good challenge. Finally, behind Zant, controlling everything, is Ganondorf. Back for the 3rd time in the series with once again an incredible and intimidating design. His final battle, although a bit easy, is a 4-stage dramatic and creative battle, covering both his demon pig form and his human form on horseback, all culminating in an epic final one-on-one fight. Again, that last fight is too easy, but the drama, the tension, and the incredible music make it one of the best dramatic battles in the series. One last area of the gameplay to mention is, of course, Wolf Link. This was one of the key features in the marketing for Twilight Princess. Getting to transform into a wolf at almost any time and have a different moveset was a very intriguing idea. Sadly though, I feel it wasn't executed in a particularly interesting way. There are very few moments beyond the first half of the story that you are either required to or would even want to transform into a wolf. The form has much less effective attacks that are both weaker and harder to hit with. There's no ranged attacks, bar an auto-target move that can kill some enemies in one hit, and you can't use any items at all, overall making the wolf form much less effective and versatile to use. The only real benefit you get from this form is a higher speed, allowing you to dart around areas faster than Link's human form. But there is rarely a reason to use that speed beyond not having Epona readily available. Ultimately, Wolf Link is an interesting addition, but sadly an underutilized one, that was more of a cool story beat and game mechanic than one that was actually cleverly integrated into the gameplay. This is evidenced by the fact he is only needed to defeat one form of Ganondorf and a handful of enemies throughout the whole game. It gives me the impression that perhaps this form was a late addition in the development of Twilight Princess. As for the rest of the story, well, although it's not necessarily the most intricate one told in video games, its key moments and lore building are incredible. The first time Link sees Zant is amazing. You complete the third dungeon and warp back to the overworld. Link turns around and is instantly taken down by Zant. And Midna, Link's guide and companion throughout the story, is nearly killed on the spot, really displaying the power of this villain and setting up a reason to find the Master Sword. You also get a great scene that tells the dark and twisted story of the Triforce. It's depicted in a creepy and compelling cutscene that lets off a very Majora's Mask style vibe. But Twilight Princess goes deeper than just vibes of other games in the series. Like Wind Waker, it has direct connections to Ocarina of Time. After Link returned to his childhood, he warns Zelda of Ganondorf's plan. He is arrested, and the sages attempt to execute him. They stab him through the chest, but the gods still provide him with the Triforce of Power, enabling him to take the sword out of his chest and kill the sage with their own weapon. As a last resort, they trap him in the Twilight Realm, leaving the people of that world to deal with him instead. The story is set several generations after Ocarina of Time, but we still see remnants of that world. For example, the Sheikah tribe, guardians of the Hyrule family, are all but wiped out, and it appears only a version of Impa survives, hidden out in a Wild West shanty town full of cats. It's about as adorable as it sounds. But the best connection of all is a mysterious golden wolf. When you find him, he takes you for training and transforms into a Stalfos, a creature humans turn into if they get lost in the forest without a fairy to guide them, something Link was missing at the end of Majora's Mask. This Stalfos is intelligent, can transform, and trains Link in the way of the hero. In-game, it is heavily hinted that this Stalfos is Link from Ocarina of Time, and it was even confirmed in the Hyrule Historia book from 2011. To this day, in my opinion, it's the best lore connection in the series, and I can only hope they take it further in the future. The only area of the story that is a bit of a letdown in this game is that Zelda is barely in it, and doesn't really have much of a role, if not any role, to play in it. She helps Link right at the last moment and saves Midna at one point, but otherwise you barely see her for the whole game. During development, there were plans to have Zelda return as Sheik, but it was cut for whatever reason. It's a shame, as she is a good design for the character and could have been used much more interestingly. Thankfully though, Midna is used very well throughout the story, going from an angry and vengeful creature who is only out for herself, to coming to truly care for Link and Zelda and the world of Hyrule. She is one of the best written characters in the series in terms of her motivations and characteristics, that again has not really been topped in the franchise since. She has remained a fan favourite since her one and only appearance in the franchise. Lastly, I have to mention the presentation. And well, this is an odd one to cover. Let's start off with the bad. The graphics have not aged well. When you first boot up even the HD version, it frankly looks ugly in places. Character models are very blocky in design and are very low in texture detail. Link specifically was improved for the HD version, but not by enough. And overall, everything is just very dull and lifeless. The beautiful, bold design of Wind Waker is mostly gone and replaced with a colourless and drab art style that not only aged poorly, but didn't exactly look great when it first released. Nintendo followed the darker tone that other games were going for at the time, and although it's what fans wanted, it definitely gave a very muted style, and generally, it's just not as interesting as Wind Waker's. However, weirdly, in this playthrough, the art style grew on me. I started to really appreciate the lighting and how its subtlety really gave off a unique look. The darker and grittier style gave me vibes of Lord of the Rings, and ultimately, by the end, it had completely captured me. Sure, it hasn't aged well, and is nowhere near as good as Wind Waker, but it's still beautiful in its own way. The music is, as always, still amazing here. Sure, there is some boring tracks like the battle music, but there's also amazing ones, such as Midnight's Lament, Kakariko Village, The Hidden Town, and many more areas. The fight against Ganondorf has one of the most intimidating and multi-tiered songs in the franchise, and the overall theme is also incredible, being on par with Wind Waker's. Even the title screen has an incredible piece to kick off the mood. Sadly, it still uses MIDI music rather than a full orchestra, and overall does seem to have a lower audio quality than Wind Waker, but it does still hold up well today. The presentation overall holds up pretty well, despite its graphics not being the best. However, it is massively let down by its lack of voice acting. This is the first in the series where I feel it is truly harmed by the lack of it. The cutscenes are much more cinematic than before, and since characters' mouths now move during cutscenes, it is incredibly off-putting for them to make no sound. It doesn't ruin the experience, but it could have been so much better had they given it the full voice acting it deserved. So overall, what do I think of Twilight Princess now? Well, despite an incredibly boring and long opening, its lack of voice acting, and not having exactly the most exciting art style, I still find it to be great. The extra difficulty fixed one of the main issues I had with the Wii version, and once you get past the first few hours of the adventure, all of the annoying aspects of it never make a return. This is the last time we got a fully traditional 3D Zelda game, with a focus on dungeons, a large explorable world that, although open, is still restricted in just the right way to give a strong feeling of progression, and overall just took the older 3D Zelda style to its grandest and most epic scale it's ever been. I would love to see either a direct sequel to Twilight Princess in the same style, or an entirely new Zelda with that classic format. The series would change up a lot after this, but it was a hell of a swan song for that classic 3D style to go out on, and still stands as one of the best games in the franchise. So the last GameCube Zelda game, and the first on the Wii, was a massive success. So much so that until Breath of the Wild came along, it was the most successful in the franchise. We almost got a sequel, a full-fledged one at that. But instead, we got Link's Crossbow Training, a light gun shooter game set in the Zelda universe. Oh, okay, it wasn't a bad game, but it's not exactly the sequel I or anyone else was hoping for. Sadly, Twilight Princess never got a chance to expand on its story and world, and alongside Skyward Sword, is one of the only 3D titles in the series that didn't get a direct sequel. Weirdly, Wind Waker, one of Nintendo's less successful Zelda games, got 2 sequels, and I'll be covering the first of them in my next video with The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass. No, really this time. It's a unique game in the series in 2 ways, in that it is fully touchscreen controlled, and that it blends 2D and 3D Zelda styles into one adventure. This one's already written and recorded, so you can expect it much sooner than this video. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Phil, and I'm the creator of the Pixel Tavern. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the Pixel Tavern for more videos on Zelda and beyond. Click the like button and leave a comment on your experiences and thoughts on Twilight Princess. Where, when, and how did you first play it? Do you prefer the Wii's motion controls or the standard controls? And how annoyed are you that Twilight Princess didn't get the sequel it deserved, and instead got a light gun game? If you want to see more of my videos, there are more on screen now. Till the next video everyone, thank you very much for watching.